Currently, whatever term you want to use, we are in a global financial crisis. How we got here and how we'll get out is a puzzle, even for the top economists. What I find most difficult is grasping how our economy even works on both a micro and macro level, especially during these times. I've only heard one person explain the complexities in a manner I could relate to. He's my guest today, Jon Courtney, a certified financial planner and fiduciary who is on a mission to make the intricacies of our economic system something we all can understand. As always, a very special thanks to my patrons who make this podcast possible. If you enjoy listening, please subscribe and visit my website, barrykibrick.com, and become a patron or just get in touch with me. I appreciate hearing from you and will answer all your emails. Now, here's Jon Courtney with an economic lesson for us all. Jon, it is great to have you on Between the Lines. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been very excited to come on your show.
Well, I want to let everybody know, and this is only out of 26 years and over 1,000 guests, this is only the third time I've done this, is have somebody that I'm actually involved with on my program because I really feel it's going to benefit my viewers, my listeners, depending on where they're seeing this or hearing this. And I just wanted to let them know, though, that I am one of your clients. Is that okay? I am one of your clients. But what made me invite you on is that for your clients, you give these monthly updates. And as I'm listening to them, I got a greater understanding of macro and microeconomics than I ever have in college or listening to the talking heads on TV.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's these monthly calls, they came out of the pandemic. I never did them before COVID hit. And then it just felt so necessary in order to stay in contact with everybody.
Well, let's first set up the difference between what you are as a financial planner and what anyone else might be as a financial planner. And that is that you are a fiduciary. And I want you to tell people what that means and how is that different from being a regular broker or planner if you're a fiduciary. And then I want them to also know that your company itself is a fiduciary company, and that also makes a big difference. So explain that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's such an important part of our industry right now. A lot of professionals who do what I do grew out of the old stockbroker world, right? If you saw the Leonardo DiCaprio, like Wolf of Wall Street, we were used car salesmen for stocks, just trying to sell to make a quota every year. And then somebody got the crazy idea that maybe people advising on how people should invest their life savings should have a greater level of care, greater standard of care associated with that advice. And that's where the certified financial planner designation and the registered investment advisor business grew out of. This idea that we should be held to a fiduciary standard, a standard where we were required by law to act in the best interest of our clients first, and to disclose any conflicts of interest that might, be present in our advice, and that it should be transparent how we got paid and where the economic incentives were.
Now, we're going to talk on two levels. Your specialty is your specialty is actually the micro level of financial management. How does one person build wealth? What does one person do when they have to make investments? How do you handle your retirement? Those are the type of things that you specialize in. But it's important for my listeners and for all of us to really have an understanding of the macro as well as the micro. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to go back and forth between the two and see how that plays out, because I have to tell you, I have now been on doing this for approximately 26 years with speaking to some of the biggest physicists, scientists, mathematicians, politicians, and I must let you know that the economy is harder for me to understand than quantum mechanics. It's just that simple. The economy seems to have really, it's nuts. I don't know how to get a grip on it. So on this macro level, why does it seem so out of grasp for the average person?
Well, so it's interesting. I have a bachelor's degree in economics from USC, but it is not a bachelor of science. It's a bachelor of arts. And economics, despite our great attempts to create mathematical algorithms to predict economic outcomes, it is still driven largely by human psychology. And one of the pioneers in the field of economics is a gentleman by the name of Richard Thaler, who published a book called Misbehaving. And it was really a landmark book in that it brought into this idea that, he defined the term behavioral finance, and it brought into the idea that we don't always make rational decisions as participants in this economy. And so we have to kind of bring in an understanding of that and admit that even though the mathematics may say we're going right, the psychology sometimes drives us left.
Well, when you brought him up in one of your meetings, you actually said that you use the term lizard brains, as if that's how many of us approach the economic situation. We're using our lizard brain instead of our frontal lobe, and that's, I think, what Thaler was getting at as well.
I think so. I mean, I won't pretend to be a complete expert in it, but my understanding, my interpretation of his writings is that, yes, a lot of our decisions are still driven by this fight or flight instinct that we have. And when it comes to financial decisions, especially ones that we don't completely understand, like you mentioned, right? It's really hard to understand this stuff. So when it comes to financial decisions that we don't really understand the cause and effect of, we tend to make emotionally based decisions. And I would say one of my superpowers as a financial planner is that I'm really, really good at communicating to clients what the cause and effect of their micro decisions are and how those decisions fit into an understanding of what's going on in the macroeconomy, right? So when clients really have the best information in front of them, they're more likely to make a very good decision. And then the less information they have, the more shooting in the dark they're doing, they're probably going to make an emotional decision that may or may not take them in the right direction.
Now, I warned you that this could be an explosion of emails, but you did say that you would be willing to offer free advice to anyone that's listening if they contact you. And that still holds? You're willing to stake with that, right?
Yep. I can't stay on the phone for hours and hours, but I do offer a 1-hour free consultation to anybody who needs it, just to make sure that if they're interested in working with me, that it's a right fit. Because there's a lot of financial planners out there. We all have our own philosophies about things. And I find it's really important to make sure that for both myself and the client, we feel like it's going to be a good fit. And that first 1-hour free consultation is the only way to really feel that out.
All right. So beware. I'm giving out your website right now, and they can reach you right through there. It's villagewealthadvisors.com, and I'll spell it out for everyone, and I'll mention it once again as well. And that's WEALTHADVISORS, villagewealthadvisors.com. I warned you, John, okay? So now let's go back then for a second, because when we, on a certain level, the most micro level is our own personal household finances. And I know that I wasn't even able to get that under control.
Yeah, that's by far the hardest part. The first place we start with any new client is a real deep dive into their cash flow, money in, money out. And I have this proprietary budgeting system that I've developed that I help clients implement that grew out of 10 years of both personal struggles with trying to coordinate different cash flow philosophies between me and my wife, and then seeing those same struggles play out with my clients between them and their spouses. And after trying a whole bunch of different things, I came up with this system of organizing your finances that has the dual purpose of both creating a backstop, so you feel it when you start to run up against this concept of I've spent too much, but also, and just importantly, it empowers people with the permission to spend their money on the things that are important to them, as long as it's being done at a pace that is sustainable. And once you set up a system where both participants feel that backstop and feel that permission, it really helps to kind of unclog and smooth the way for really more enriching, happier finances.
There's no doubt. And at the same time, though, as you said, someone like you is looking at the macro side of this. And I am so confused right now. We're watching the stock market, and this will probably air maybe about 2 weeks after this conversation is taking place. Right now, in fact, we're seeing the market come back a little bit. It dropped tremendously. But what I was amazed at was just yesterday, and as I said, this is not yesterday, this is 2 weeks ago, and hopefully everything's going to be okay. The president got COVID, and you saw in one day the market take a nosedive and then a shoot up. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, one man, even though he's the president, has COVID, has this effect on the market. What is this market made out of? How does it sustain itself?
One of the dirty little secrets of financial news reporting is that in any given day, there is good news and bad news flowing through the news wires, right? Well, if the market's down, the news producers pick the bad news and say, oh, the market is down because of this bad news. And then if the market's up, they pick the good news and say the market must be up because of this good news. When the truth is, nobody really knows on any given day the cause and effect of news and stock market movement. And if you're pretending to know, you're just blowing smoke. So trying to explain what happened 2 weeks ago / yesterday with the announcement of President Biden having COVID and its effect on the market, I don't know. But I would tell you that on a macro level, one of the big concerns around COVID right now is that we're teetering on the edge of a recession. Okay, it is unclear about whether in the third quarter and the fourth quarter of this year that businesses in the U.S. are going to show growing profits or shrinking profits. Okay, and one of the big factors that can affect whether they are more profitable or less profitable is whether we have another national shutdown over COVID. COVID cases are on the rise right now, and And that fear is out there, because especially with us already teetering, something like that can push us over the edge. So there's no doubt the market will be sensitive to any suspicion about whether COVID will slow down business in this country and consumer spending in this country. But there are lots of other factors to consider. And the biggest one that is not talked about enough is what the Fed is doing. They are swinging the biggest stick in this economy.
Let's go into that a little bit, because we saw how they raised up the interest rate. I think it was 0.75, and it looks like they're going to do it again. Tell me why, if they don't do something, we're going to be upset. If they do something, like you said, it could yield so much power, it can throw things in reverse again. You even talked about a thing called hyper-pessimism. And you've got to be careful about that, because, and you've also, I guess, have to be careful of hyper-optimism, because, as I said, it seems like, I'll give you an example of one of the things that always is puzzling me. We've got a company like Ford, Toyota, and General Motors. You add up all three of those massive companies, they sell many, many, many more cars than Tesla. And yet Tesla has a higher value than the three of them times two combined. And it blows my mind. I don't understand it. What is it based on? Is this just this humongous pyramid scheme?
Oh, no, it is real. It is based on real stuff, but it's only partially based on real stuff. See, when you take the stock price of any publicly traded company, any valuation for any company, period. Okay, it really is made up of two parts. Okay, one part of that price is based on the profitability today of that company. How much profit is it able to squeeze out of its current sales right now? Okay, and that makes up one part of the price of the stock. But then there's another factor in determining the price of the stock, and that is expectations of future profitability. Okay, now in the case of Toyota, General Motors, Ford, right, all three of those companies have long track histories of profit. And so one can get a pretty good idea about what a reasonable expectation of future profit is going to be, because it's unlikely it's going to be dramatically different than recent increases or growth in those companies. Okay. But then you take a brand new car company like Tesla. They have no track history whatsoever, and they have a certain amount of profitability on their current sales, but their profitability on future sales, totally unknown. And people's expectations and excitement and optimism about the future profitability of Tesla has driven its stock price so high that, correct, it is now valued more than the other three companies. And so when you look at a lot of stocks out there that are considered growth stocks, a large portion of their stock prices are based on very optimistic expectations of future profits. Now, because it's based on optimism, as soon as we start getting a little pessimistic overall, you see those stock prices fluctuate the most dramatically.
So we see, in fact, the situation that happened with Twitter, for example, when Elon Musk decided to buy it and then not buy it. It really took that company, I think, a swing that's never been seen before.
Yeah, all over the place. I mean, anytime a single investor wants to buy a company like that, they have to bid a lot higher than the current price. That's not unusual. But then because of the dramatic I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out that Elon Musk was going through, the stock price is going nuts.
Now, in your case, you don't obviously just do stocks. There's a portfolio built by I think it's around 4 different things, if I'm correct. I think you said it's basically stocks, not basically, it's partially stocks, U.S. and international, partly bonds, partly what I guess they call REITs. These are the investments in properties and things like that, not an individual property, but the overall, and commodities. And explain how you then look at those four different areas and determine when you're going to do what you're going to do with them.
Yeah, great question. So, as you know, Barry, most of my clients are in the retired phase of life or close to it, right? My tagline is, when you're ready to retire, I'm the guy to hire. And so my investment programs are really designed around how do we create reliable retirement income for clients from their portfolios. And in order to do that in this distribution phase of life, you have to have a mix of investments that are likely to react differently to different economic forces, okay? Because the economy is always changing. Interest rates are going up. Interest rates are going down. The business cycle is up. The business cycle is down. Inflation is up. Inflation is down. Unemployment's up. Unemployment's down, right? All these different factors are moving constantly. But the four different investment classes all react a little differently to those different forces going up and down. And so for a perfect example, right, rising interest rates, okay, rising interest rates, right, have not been very good for bonds at all, okay, and rising interest rates actually have not been very good for real estate, okay, and we've seen that just in the prices of our own houses, right? Okay, but rising interest rates are usually in response to high inflation, and commodities are extremely sensitive to inflation. Okay, so of the four parts of our portfolio, the commodities piece has been exploding this year. Okay, up a ton. And so while the other parts of the portfolio may be lagging in any given point in time, there should be at least one or two pieces that are outperforming that we can sell high to create that cash flow, right? Because basic investment philosophy, buy low, sell high. You have to have something in the portfolio that you can rely on to sell high at any given point in time to create the cash flow you need. And then, of course, just in case all what breaks loose, cash is important too. And if you're not having a conversation about cash with your financial planner or financial advisor, then you're missing a huge part of the equation.
Well, that was the reason I invited you, was after your discussion on just that. You were talking about cash, short-term, long-term. Explain that a little bit, because when we think of cash, I think of what I put in my mattress, which is nothing at this point. But explain what all that is, because it's not just the dollar bill that's cash. It's a whole process that you went through on what is, from even certain bonds that are, I guess it has to do with liquidity, obviously, to some extent, but yet some of it doesn't. Some of it is hard to liquidate. So explain cash and what you do with it and what layers of it are involved here.
Yeah. So, what's interesting about the investment world is risk and return are always linked, period. Okay. You cannot get a higher return without taking more risk. The key is, though, there's lots of different types of risk out there, and you don't have to take all of the same kind of risk all at the same time in order to increase your return. Okay, so what do I mean specifically? Liquidity is one of the risks people often ignore. All right. And the market will reward you for giving up some liquidity on your money. And everybody's familiar with this. You go to the bank and you go to buy a CD, and the bank says, sure, we'll give you a little higher interest rate on your money if you're willing to tie it up in a CD for 12 months, 3 years, 5 years. And depending on how long you're willing to tie it up, they'll pay you a little more interest, okay? That's an example of being rewarded for liquidity risk, all right? And so when you're looking at your cash and your use of cash, you really have to ask yourself, how much of this cash do I need for emergencies, okay? And that's your emergency fund. Now that needs to be 100% liquid all the time. It needs to have no fluctuation in principal, so no principal risk. If you can, it should be FDIC insured, right? Should be nice and safe. That's going to be your lowest earning investment, period, because it's the safest and most liquid. Okay, so that's your cash, your emergency fund, and usually 6 to 12 months of spending as an emergency fund, if you're in your retirement years or closing in on your retirement years, is usually a good rule of thumb, but there's a big gray area there. Now, the second piece of cash is the cash you would need to fund your short-term goals. Okay, these are things that are anywhere from like 12 months out to maybe 3 years out, maybe even as long as 5 years out. Okay, short-term goals could be things like children going to college. It could be down payment on a new house or down payment on a vacation home. It could be going on a vacation. It could be purchase of a new car, right? Those are all examples of large purchases we might make in the next 12, to 36 months or so. Now, that short-term cash bucket, you can usually very safely and reasonably exchange some liquidity for some return. Okay. And again, a CD is a good example of that. Now, the type of investment that I was offering to my clients was a little bit more sophisticated version of a CD in order to get a little bit more return, but it was still fit into the idea of, hey, let's look at what cash you will not need for the next 12 months, but you'll probably need in the next, 2 or 3 years. Now, any cash that you have that you're not going to need for at least 3 to 5 years, we call that long-term savings. And long-term savings is the type of cash that you want to go ahead and get invested in a good diversified portfolio for long-term growth.
Now, with that said, Jon, I'm going to set you up again because I think people are going to want to find out more about this, and you did promise you will respond. I'm going to give out your website once again. It's villagewealthadvisors.com. Once again, that's villagewealthadvisors.com. And if for some reason you can't spell it right or something, just get in touch with me at barrykibrick.com and I'll forward you Jon's information. Because it is important that, especially, as Jon says, as you're thinking about, and when you say, by the way, you're looking at thinking about retirement, that could be 10 years away even, 15 years away, but those are the type of people that you specialize in, even though I know you have some younger clients as well, those that are trying to build wealth, but especially in that category of 50 plus, they really now are needing to figure out, okay, how do we go from here? And the one thing we talked about prior to us coming on the air here was the difference between our fears when we see the money in the market change versus our fears when we see the money in our home value change. And I'll never forget the answer you gave. You said it hurts more to have money taken from us than it does winning. And I am such a perfect example of that. And I'll tell a quick story. Many years ago, I was invited with friends to go to the track. And I had no money, but these guys were apartment building owners, and they invited me, and I lived in their apartment. Quick story, I took $2 and bet on a trifecta at the last race, and I won because they were just so, I won over $800 on a $2 bet. It was unbelievable at that time. The next day we played blackjack, and I lost $50. And I must tell you, it stopped me from gambling ever again, because winning $800 did not feel as good as losing 50. So I'm a classic example of why it hurts more to have money taken from you. Explain how that works into how you deal with your clients.
Yeah, God, what a great story. It's a perfect illustration. The truth of the matter is, right, most people's portfolios right now, with where the stock market is, you're probably down somewhere between 10 and 20%. And what people don't realize is that you're probably at about the same point you were at the beginning of 2021. Okay, so you've lost maybe 18 months worth of the growth in your portfolio, in the last 7 months. Okay, but I guarantee you, this 7 months hurt a whole lot more than the joy you got from your portfolio increase between January 2021 and the end of 2021, right? And but that doesn't matter. Even though objectively, rationally, we can justify that, it doesn't matter because we're most of my clients are not Mr. Spock. They're more like Captain Kurt. And they're not making Mr. Spock type of analysis of the situation. They're the emotional reacting, like Captain Kurt. And if I can't tailor my financial advice to get Captain Kurt to make the right decision, okay, then I'm failing completely, right? I can't count on every single one of my clients being a Mr. Spock. And that's probably one of the most important lessons I've learned in my financial planning career. And I think too many professionals in my industry just figure, hey, well, if I've given the Mr. Spock advice, it's up to the client to make the right decision. I've done my job. I led the horse to water, right? But for me, that's not good enough. I need to be able to give my advice in a way that convinces, but also educates my clients that they are ready and wanting to drink, in addition to being led to the water.
Now, we talked earlier a little bit about the Fed's role in the situation today, but let's talk about the government's role in general. And I like the term you used as the safety net of last resort. So let's discuss the government's role, because right now, in fact, I found this interesting, and this will be going on for at least the 2 weeks, so I don't have to give even an exclaimer here, because I just know it will be. This is the chip subsidiary that's going on right now, where government is involved in wanting to give chip makers some incentive to bring the chip manufacturing to this country. And it started out it started as a $76 billion giveaway, and it's now turning into, due to the way bills are layered upon layered, it's now turning into a $250 billion giveaway to corporations that are some of the wealthiest corporations in the world. So that's one element of a safety net. The other, of course, is the safety net that we have, Social Security, Medicare, things like that. So I'm not against the safety net, but it surely seems it's out of whack.
Well, there's lots of different types of safety nets, right? Just like there's lots of different types of welfare, right? There's welfare that goes to the poorest families in our country, and then there's the welfare that we dish out to corporations when they fall on hard times, right? There's a lot of different recipients of welfare. Now, the decision on the chip maker to bring the chip makers back into the country, that is kind of also a defense decision. The government has begun to look at computer chips like they would oil. We have a strategic oil reserve, right? And we want to make sure that our country is food secure and not dependent on other countries for food in the case of wartime. And the decision to bring the chip manufacturing back on the U.S., that's partially in that same realm of thinking. But so beginning in the 90s, there was this huge movement towards this idea of a global free trade system, and that through global free trade, all boats would be floated up, and all of our standard of livings would grow as countries of the world began to specialize in the economies that made the most sense for them, and then that would lead to greater purchasing power for specifically the U.S. And we did see that, and we did feel that for a long time. We may be reaching a point now where the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. Okay, we saw that a few years ago in the trade war with China. We've been hearing it for a long time about coal miners and things like that. Again, really big picture macroeconomically, we might be seeing the beginnings of a swing back towards an anti-globalization. I mean, we saw Britain pull out of the European Union. Certainly, the war in Europe between Ukraine and Russia is not helping this concept of globalization. And as other countries, specifically China, are becoming both a military and an economic equal to the U.S. or approaching, it's a little harder to scream, hey, let's all be global and free when you're no longer the top dog.
Well, you say, though, that one of the ways you described it to me is that we have the most resilient and flexible economy, but we have the weaker safety net. And that's and I think I responded, and I'll never forget what Ben Franklin said. He said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither. Now, again, I don't want to go back 250 years to the founding fathers, because in the case of Ben Franklin, he's one of my favorites. But the point is that we do need the liberty, but we do need the safety. And that balance, boy, does that seem like right now it's so divided and so fragile at the same time.
Yeah, one of the things that's developed around the world is kind of these different versions of capitalism. Okay, and here in the U.S. we have one of the freest capitalist systems, and that's what gives us our resiliency that I talked about and the flexibility that I talked about. In Europe they have a much more socialist version of capitalism, right? You have concepts like guaranteed employment, right, that create a little less flexibility and a little less resilience in those countries. Okay, and then you have China's version of capitalism, which is a command communist style economy, right? And there are pros and cons to each, believe it or not. I mean, you look at China and they can draft a 50-year economic plan and they can stick to it, because they're not going to have political change in those 50 years, right? Here in the U.S., we have a hard time building a high-speed railroad from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Okay? So, there are pros and cons to each. I happen to believe that we've got the best version of it, of the three. But there's a lot of room for improvement, and there's a lot of flexibility, right? As we become a wealthier and wealthier country, there is more and more of an appetite for creating a greater safety net. There was a lot of talk in the last election about the idea of a guaranteed minimum income, right? There's a lot of human value to that concept, but like anything, there is an economic cost to it, and we just have to be aware of it. Universal healthcare is another example. That's a wonderful concept for the human standard of living, right? And there may even be a sound economic argument, but there are no doubts there will be economic drawbacks to that also.
Oh, you can see them both, but the problem is we don't see them clearly. We are sometimes, as you say, we are politically motivated more than economically motivated, and we sometimes link the politics to the economics. Not sometimes, it's always linked together, and there's a problem there, because like you said, politically it may sound nice for all of us to have guaranteed income. But when they saw how that looked and experimented with it, it didn't turn out quite that way because someone is still paying for that guaranteed income. And if you don't have the incentive to move out of that, it's going to hurt you in the long run. We have to be careful about that. We think of the safety net as something like, whew, thank God I have it. But then as Franklin said, but where's my liberty? All of a sudden I want to do something and I can't. And I even see that even currently with Medicare, which if once you're 65, you kind of participate in, it's a wonderful safety net, but there's someone still making a decision besides you and your doctor on what they're going to give you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There is no free lunch, right? There's a cost to everything. And I stress that all the time to my clients certainly when making financial and investment decisions. If it looks like, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is, right? But understanding, what that trade-off is and being clear about, what the trade-off is, I think is the most important part of any economic, political, financial, decision you're going to be making. One of the things that I do want to touch on, and this is really a cautionary note to all of your listeners, is I see this all the time. Do not allow your political opinions, your political views to influence your expectations of the economy. Hands down, I see it almost 100% across the board. My more liberal leaning clients, when President Trump was in office, they were so pessimistic about everything, but also about the economy and about their investment decisions. Okay. And then when President Biden took office, they became extremely optimistic. And it's been the complete opposite for my more conservative clients. They were extremely optimistic when President Trump was in office and then switched to being extremely pessimistic when President Biden took over. And I'm just here to tell you that the data simply does not support either of your positions. Who was in the office of president has so little to do with the direction of your investment portfolio. Okay, I'm not saying it doesn't affect huge areas of our lives. Okay, but do not make the mistake of making portfolio investment decisions based on your political views, because there are factors much greater than that truly affecting the movement of your portfolio.
Well, speaking of which, when that happens, your job is to continuously rebalance those portfolios. And I could see how that could be an issue if someone is an ideologue over a realizer or a realist, then the ideology can get in the way of making that proper decision. When you're the fiduciary, you're responsible. You're not going to make, that's the other thing about a fiduciary. You're not going to make a dime unless your clients make money. That's what I think is kind of a beautiful safety net in itself, is because you don't get money from selling stocks. You don't get money from trading commodities. You don't get anything unless your clients are growing, but it still is are financially growing, but it still is your responsibility to balance that portfolio.
Yeah, I said before, the fundamental, investment strategy, right? Buy low, sell high. But I cannot tell you in practice how difficult that actually is to do. And let me just give you a perfect example. I say, hey, Barry, I've got an investment that 4 years ago was up 10%, and then was up 15, and then was up 20, and then was up 30. Do you want to buy that investment?
You're asking me? Now I'm going to say no because it's already gone up 30%.
Well, but I'm guessing a lot of, and it's funny, I was getting my hair cut the other day and I was having this discussion with my hairdresser and I asked her, I said, I'm going to give you an example. Here's this investment, right? Same thing. And she said, yeah, I want to buy that investment. Look how well it's been doing.
Oh, look at that. Just the opposite.
Okay. I said, okay. I said, now on the flip side, I've got an investment for you that was up 10%, was up 15%, was up 20%, and is now down 30%. Do you want to buy that investment? She says, no. She says, how much lower is it going to go? It sounds like that investment's losing money. And I said, that's the perfect example. What you wanted to do was buy high and sell low. And you will never make money buying high and selling low. But you're right. Your rational response was the correct response. You want to stay away from those investments that have been trading high, 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 high. Not that you want to stay away. You just do not want to be buying at that top part right there. You want to be focused more on the investments that can be bought at a value today.
Well, I'm only right because I learned that from you, Jon. So I have to admit, Jon, our time is basically up, believe it or not. I want to again let everyone know that I am a client. I don't want them to be deceived by anything, but that I've had you on because of your wisdom and the fact that you said you would talk to every one of my listeners if they should call. So I want to give out your website once again. It's villagewealthadvisors.com. That's villagewealthadvisors.com. If you can't get it, just reach me at barrykibrick.com and I'll pass on your information to Jon. Jon, it was truly a pleasure to get some clarity, especially in our time right now when we're seeing this inflation, stagflation, all of this stuff, to get some clarity on the whole system. And you really brought that home, and I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you so much. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. I respect you so much, and I thank you for choosing me for your own, financial planning, and then for this incredible gesture of inviting you on my show and letting me talk to your listeners.
Well, as I said, I think I watch virtually everything and read virtually everything I can get my hands on in almost every field. That's my living. But when it came to the economy, it wasn't until I heard you speak that any of it even began to make sense. So I just needed to share you. What can I say? And I'm grateful I did, my friend. And I want you to have a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life, and be healthy and wealthy and wise.
Excellent. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe or become a patron of the show at barrykibrick.com to keep it going every week. Thank you.